We stand beneath a sky that once looked upon a very different world, a world older than memory, older than myth, nearly 1,000,000 years before our time. The continents were already taking familiar shapes, yet the air itself felt heavier, laden with the quiet pulse of a planet still changing. In this deep age, around 900,000 years ago, our kind teetered on the edge of disappearance. Only a few thousand humans, perhaps fewer, walked the earth. The rest, more than 99% of our ancestors, were gone, extinguished by forces we are only now beginning to understand. But before we reach that moment of collapse, we must first step into their world, a world untouched by civilization, where the rhythm of survival was the heartbeat of existence. The sun rises over ancient Africa, its golden light stretching across endless plains. Mist curls above rivers where hippos stir, and the first calls of early birds echo through the trees. In the distance, the silhouettes of small figures move quietly through tall grass. Not yet us, but not unlike us either. They are early humans, perhaps Homo heidelbergensis, or one of their shadowy ancestors. Their faces are broad, their bodies strong and deliberate. They walk in groups, carrying simple stone tools, their lives woven into the rhythm of the land. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived in small bands scattered across Africa and beyond, breathing, hunting, sleeping under the same stars that still burn above us tonight. The earth was different then. Temperatures swung wildly from warm, lush periods to icy, punishing ages. Seas rose and fell. Forests turned to desert and back again, and slowly and visibly, a great crisis began to unfold. Modern science has uncovered its faint trace, hidden deep within ancient DNA. Genetic patterns in our blood whisper of a time when humanity almost vanished. Somewhere between 900,000 and 800,000 years ago, our population shrank to perhaps just 1,000 breeding individuals. A collapse so immense it nearly erased our species from the tree of life. We don't know the full story, but we can imagine it. The clues lie in ancient sediments, in the frozen cores of ice, and in the faint echoes of climate that changed faster than our ancestors could adapt. Perhaps the rains stopped. Perhaps fire and frost traded places in violent cycles. Perhaps food grew scarce and rivers dried to dust. The earth has done this before, its great glacial heart beating slow, each pulse reshaping the destiny of life. And through it all, a few humans endured. They watched the skies darken and clear again. They felt the cold bite their skin and saw the last of their kin disappear beyond the horizon. Yet somehow, they survived. As we begin this journey into the deep past, we are not just studying fossils or numbers in genetic code. We are listening to the silence between eras, the hush that follows extinction, and the whisper of persistence that follows it still. To understand how 99% of humanity was lost, we must travel through landscapes now buried in time, across savannas of golden grass, through the echoing canyons of ancient rivers, into the dark shelter of caves where fire first took hold. We must step inside the minds of those who lived without knowing they were the last of their kind. What did they dream of beneath starlit skies? Did they feel fear or awe as the world around them began to fade? And when they looked into the eyes of their children, did they know how precarious their future truly was? Tonight we follow that fading trail, from the scattered remains of early humans to the clues locked inside our DNA. This is the story of the greatest near extinction in human history, a time when almost all of us disappeared, and yet, from that tiny spark, the entire future of humanity was born. The earth remembers, even when we forget. Every breath we take carries the memory of those who did not. Every step we walk continues a journey that nearly ended before it truly began. In the next part, we will step deeper into that forgotten world to see the earth as it was then, vast, untamed, and alive with sound and light. the cradle and the crucible of humankind. Before the silence of extinction, there was the sound of a living world, a planet breathing, teeming, shimmering with light and movement. It was a world both familiar and alien. The skies were the same endless blue that we see today, but the creatures beneath them, the forests, the rivers, the winds, all carried a rhythm untouched by human hands. We stand, in imagination, upon the soil of early Africa, nearly 900,000 years ago. The air is warm, moist and heavy with the scent of rain-soaked grass. Mist drifts across an ancient river valley, perhaps the early Nile, or a forgotten branch of it, a ribbon of life winding through endless savanna. The sun, just risen, spills across plains the color of honey. In the distance, shapes stir. Herds of massive elephants with long, straight tusks, rhinos built like living fortresses, and antelope leaping through tall grass that sways in rhythmic waves. Nearby, in the shadow of acacia trees, a small group of early humans crouch, silent observers of this living sea. They do not rule this world. They are part of it. Everywhere, life moves with slow deliberation. Rivers shimmer with crocodiles lying still as stone. Fish dart beneath the surface, their scales catching flecks of sunlight like drifting stars. Above, flocks of birds trace invisible maps through the sky, migrating with the seasons, as they have for millions of years. This is the Middle Pleistocene, a time when Earth was caught between ice and fire. The planet's climate danced to a strange, slow rhythm, glaciers growing and shrinking in great cycles. Every few thousand years, the air cooled or warmed, and with each change, the world reshaped itself. Forests retreated, deserts spread. Then, as the planet breathed again, the greenery returned, but never quite the same. The creatures adapted, moved, or vanished, and through it all, humans drifted with the land, following food, warmth, and water wherever they could find them. There were no borders, no nations, only the quiet dialogue between Earth and life. Rain would fall for months, turning valleys into great lakes that mirrored the clouds. Then drought would return, and the land would crack, dry and harden like baked clay. The rivers would vanish, leaving bones and memories behind. When night came, the world belonged to the sounds of survival. The distant roars of big cats, perhaps early lions or saber-toothed relatives, echoed across the plains. In the dark, eyes glowed amber among the reeds. And yet, even here, in this wild and merciless theater, there was peace, the deep rhythmic peace of nature continuing as it always had. To walk this ancient earth is to feel both wonder and smallness. Every stone underfoot has been shaped by countless years of wind and rain. Every gust of air has passed through lungs, of beasts, of birds, of beings long forgotten. The sky of that time was brighter, not from city lights, but from stars uncountable. At night, the Milky Way stretched like a silver river overhead, a map of eternity that our ancestors surely watched in silence. Perhaps they did not name the stars, but they must have known their constancy. The same lights guiding us now guided them. Beneath those skies, fireflies glowed in the grass, and the night air was cool, filled with the distant hum of insects. The earth pulsed with quiet energy, every sound, every scent, every movement carrying meaning. In the highlands, ancient mountains still towered as silent witnesses. Volcanoes rumbled far in the distance, sending whispers of smoke into the dawn. To the north, winds from colder regions swept over dry plains, bringing whispers of the first glacial breath. And to the south, tropical forests thrived, dense, humid, alive with life that hummed and sang unseen. In those forests, early humans found shade and shelter. Here, vines hung heavy with fruit. Monkeys called from the treetops, their cries echoing through emerald cathedrals of leaves. In the shadows, small figures gathered edible roots, cracked nuts, and listened for the footfalls of predators nearby. Each day was measured not by clocks, but by sunlight. When the heat grew too strong, they rested in caves or under trees. When the light softened, they moved again, slow, quiet, purposeful. They were in tune with the rhythm of the earth itself. There was beauty here, but it was a harsh beauty. To live in this world was to accept its rules. The land gives, and the land takes away. Storms could sweep across the plains in moments, turning the sky black, lightning cracking open the horizon. And yet, after the flood, new grass would grow. The same rains that drowned also nourished. The same fires that burned the forests cleared space for new life to begin. Our ancestors learned this balance instinctively. They watched animals migrate. They followed herds through narrow valleys, learned where to find water even in dry months, and remembered the trees that bore fruit in season. Nature was their teacher, and its lessons were written not in words but in survival. The world was vast, unimaginably vast, and humans were only a tiny part of it. Across distant continents, other beings thrived. In Asia, ancient elephants called stegodons moved through jungles. In Europe, cold-adapted beasts roamed the tundra, giant deer, wild horses, and fierce predators that left deep claw marks in the cave walls of time. The Earth's climate was shifting. Even then, slow, subtle, but relentless. The balance that had nourished life for so long was beginning to falter. Dry seasons lengthened. Rainfall patterns broke apart. Glaciers advanced, stealing the oceans inch by inch. And though early humans could not see the pattern, they could feel it. Their world was changing, and each year, it became a little harder to find the warmth and food that once came easily. Yet even in this uncertainty, there was an unspoken harmony, a sense that life, no matter how fragile, would continue. The land may have shifted, the rivers may have vanished, but the will to endure remained unbroken. Sometimes in the evening light, one can imagine a small band of early humans sitting near a fire, the flames flickering against stone, the air filled with the soft hiss of burning grass. They watch sparks rise into the night, each ember floating upward like a star being born. They say nothing, but perhaps they feel what we still feel, the quiet awe of existence. This world, though wild and untamed, was home. It was everything. The cradle of dreams, the teacher of patience, the silent companion of a species just learning to survive. Soft music fades in, deep and spacious, like a slow breath. The ancient Earth was not merely a backdrop for human history. It was the story itself, shaping, testing, and ultimately defining those who walked upon it. In this living theater of storms and stars, humanity began its slow dance with destiny, a dance that would carry us through catastrophe and renewal, through silence and rebirth. In the next chapter, we will travel deeper into that unfolding story, to the first steps of humankind's long journey, their origins, their rise, and the delicate spark of life that refused to go out. Long before collapse, before the numbers fell and the silence grew heavy, there was a beginning. Quiet, steady, miraculous. The birth of us. Not suddenly, not with thunder or revelation, but through countless generations of small changes, hands learning to shape, minds learning to wonder, hearts learning to fear and to hope. We were not yet the humans we know today, but the seeds had already been planted deep within the bones of ancient primates who gazed across the same horizon we now call history. Somewhere between 2 million and 1 million years ago, Africa became a continent of restless change. Volcanoes reshaped valleys, rivers carved new paths through the soil, and the climate swung between extremes, lush green seasons fading into endless droughts. In this world, one creature began to stand apart. Not taller, not faster, not stronger, but different. Curious, patient, capable of waiting. Watching, and learning. They were our ancestors, perhaps Homo ergaster, perhaps Homo erectus, the first humans to truly walk upright across open plains. Their bones tell of long legs built for endurance, hands made for grasping, for holding, for making. Their eyes, set forward like ours, saw with purpose. They could plan, anticipate, remember, and somewhere within them the first glimmer of thought took root. Imagine an early morning in that world, mist rising from the grasslands. A group of figures moves quietly along the riverbank, their footprints soft in the wet clay. One stops, stoops down, and lifts a stone. It fits perfectly in their palm. A few sharp strikes against another rock. Flakes fall away, edges form, and suddenly, a new thing exists, a tool, simple and crude, yet a whisper of something profound. This was the first language of intention. Stone speaking to hand, hand speaking to mind. A bridge between thought and action. From that moment, humanity had begun to create. The first tools were nothing more than chipped stones. But in those edges lay the promise of everything to come. Each cut, each mark, each improvement was an act of quiet invention. They learned which rocks fractured cleanly, which made sharper blades, which could cut through bone or wood or hide. The making of a tool was not only survival, it was identity. It marked the dawn of human awareness, the realization that the world could be shaped, that the future could be changed by what the hands could hold. And with tools came fire. At first, fire was a mystery, a creature of the storms, a force that appeared from lightning and vanished into ash. But over time, humans learned its ways. They learned that embers could be carried in hollow logs, that heat could keep the dark at bay. Fire meant safety, warmth, and endurance. In the red glow of the first campfires, our ancestors gathered close. They cooked food, they scared away predators, and perhaps, for the first time, they began to share stories, not in words as we know them, but in gestures, looks, and sounds. The first flickers of communication, the beginnings of meaning. This was the slow awakening of humanity. Generation after generation, small groups spread across the continent. They followed herds of migrating animals. They crossed rivers, climbed hills, and explored lands no creature of their kind had ever seen. Some wandered north, toward the cool lands of the Levant and beyond. They saw snow for the first time. They learned to make shelter against wind and frost. Each migration changed them a little, physically, mentally, instinctively. The great experiment of evolution continued, patient and unseen, and with every step, they left behind more than footprints. They left signs, tools, bones, ashes, each a quiet message to the future. We were here. Their days were long but simple. The search for food was the rhythm of life. They hunted small animals, gathered fruits, roots, and insects. They knew the land intimately, the smell of rain before it came, the color of plants that could heal or harm, and though they lived without cities or words, they knew something deeper: connection. They understood instinctively that they were not alone in the vastness of Earth, that the strength of one depended on the many. At night, when the fires burned low, they looked up at the stars. Those same lights, silent and eternal, reflected in their eyes. And perhaps, even then, a question began to form. Why are we here? Over time, the branches of the human family grew and diverged. Homo habilis gave way to Homo erectus, and later to Homo heidelbergensis, a species that carried the strength of the old and the intelligence of the new. They were the ancestors of both Neanderthals and modern humans. They learned to hunt cooperatively, to plan, to share, to endure. Their tools became refined, their shelters more deliberate. They were not animals acting on impulse. They were beings of purpose. It is here, in this slow unfolding, that the foundations of humanity were laid. The skills that would later define civilization, creativity, empathy, cooperation, all began in these simple acts of survival. And yet, the Earth itself had other plans. Even as humanity learned to thrive, the planet was changing again. The climate, once predictable, grew volatile. Long droughts swept across entire regions. Ice sheets advanced and retreated in endless rhythm. Forests turned to dust. Rivers vanished into the ground. Those who lived during this time could not know that they were standing at the edge of a great bottleneck, a narrowing of life that would decide whether the human story would continue at all. But before the storm, there was calm. And in that calm, our ancestors walked, hunted, loved, and dreamed beneath the ancient sky. Every discovery, every spark of insight, was a small victory against extinction. When they learned to preserve embers for warmth, they defied the cold. When they shared food within the group, they ensured survival beyond the individual. When they began to recognize faces, voices, and patterns, they built the first foundations of memory, the origin of human connection. And perhaps more than anything else, they learned hope, an emotion as ancient as the soil beneath their feet. Hope that the next sunrise would bring food, that the next child would live, that the next season would be kind. That hope, invisible, fragile, was the thread that carried them forward through the darkness that was yet to come. From scattered bands on the African plains to the first migrations across mountains and seas, the early humans began their long ascent. They did not know where they were going, only that they must keep moving. Every step they took brought them closer to the edge of a future they could not see, a future that would test them beyond imagining. For from the fertile valleys of their birth would soon come the long night of near extinction, a trial that would strip humanity to its bones and force evolution to begin again, from a spark no larger than a whisper. In the next part, we will walk beside them in that quiet life, their daily routines, their habits, their moments of peace, before the great silence descended. A glimpse into the ordinary days of the humans who nearly vanished from time. They wake with the first light of dawn, as the air begins to warm and the horizon glows soft gold. The camp stirs slowly, not with words, but with movement. The quiet rustle of bodies stretching, the soft crunch of bare feet on soil, the gentle sound of breathing as the world comes alive again. The night has passed safely. That is enough reason to rise. Their shelters are simple, arcs of branches covered in leaves or grass, built near water where reeds and fish are plentiful. The scent of damp earth fills the air. Dew clings to their hair and skin. Above them, the sky opens wide, endless and pale. For these early humans, every morning is a new world, remade by light. A few steps away from the camp to drink, their reflection ripples across the surface of the river, broken by the passing of small fish beneath. Others check the ashes of last night's fire, adding dried grass and blowing softly until the embers glow again. Flames catch, small and orange, and warmth returns to the circle. Around that fire, life will unfold. Quiet, patient, cyclical, each day begins the same way. The group divides naturally. Some move toward the trees to gather berries, nuts, or honey hidden within the bark. Others follow the trails of animals across the grasslands, carrying stone tools chipped sharp for cutting. The youngest stay close, playing with sticks, copying what they see. It is not play as we know it, but the beginning of learning, a rehearsal for survival. There are no words, yet meaning flows easily. A gesture, a sound, a glance is enough. A raised hand signals danger. A low hum calls attention. When one finds food, the others notice the tone of excitement, the shift in breath. Communication is not invented. It grows like a vine from the soil of necessity. As the sun climbs higher, the heat deepens. Shadows shorten and the rhythm of work slows. They move under trees, rest on stones warmed by the morning light, and eat in silence. Fruit, roots sometimes meet when a hunt succeeds. They share what they have without question. The boundary between self and group is faint. They do not survive alone. They are a single rhythm of movement, hunger, and rest. The children watch their elders crack nuts between stones, strip bark from branches, or cut open tubers from the ground. They watch the sparks of fire, the flash of tools, the flight of birds. Their eyes learn faster than any words could teach. Memory, passed not through language but through repetition, becomes the lifeline of the species. The land provides, but only through patience. Some days the hunt returns empty. The group eats little, conserving energy, sleeping longer. Other days, a catch fills the air with the smell of cooked meat, shared piece by piece. Every meal is both gratitude and lesson. Nothing is wasted. Bones become tools, hides become shelter, fat feeds the fire. Every action is precise, deliberate, and ancient in its grace. Afternoons stretch long and quiet. The adults sit together, watching the distance. The world hums softly. Insects, wind, the faint murmur of the river. Occasionally one hums back, a low rhythm that rises and falls like the breeze. There is no music yet, but something close to it. The instinct to turn sound into pattern, to make beauty from air. The smallest children fall asleep in the shade, their breathing steady. The others wander, touching stones, tracing shapes in dust. In these gestures lie the beginnings of imagination, the mind's ability to form pictures, to wonder. They do not yet tell stories, but they already dream. As the light begins to fade, the group gathers again by the fire. The hunters return slowly, their bodies marked by dust and sun. Success or failure is shared in the same calm. There is no boasting, no shame. The day has passed. That is all that matters. They sit close, shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of the flames dancing over their faces. The smell of smoke and roasted roots fills the air. A mother chews food before giving it to her child. A man tends the embers, feeding them small pieces of wood. Sparks rise into the darkening sky, carried upward by invisible air currents, until they vanish into the stars. Above them the night deepens, vast and endless, the same stars that have watched over every generation since. The quiet stretches long, unbroken. Only the crackle of fire and the soft breaths of the group remain. In this silence, something sacred stirs, not in words or prayer, but in presence. They do not think of the future, but they feel its weight. They do not name love, but they live it in every shared moment of warmth and protection. When sleep comes, it comes gently. Some lie close to the fire, others beneath trees. The land cools, the insects sing, and the night folds over them like a blanket. The earth itself seems to breathe in rhythm with their rest. This is what life has always been at its most elemental. Waking, moving, seeking, resting. A cycle as old as wind and water. They do not chase progress. They do not measure time. Their lives are shaped by the world's quiet pulse, and in that stillness lies a wisdom we have almost forgotten. Every sunrise is a renewal, every sunset a surrender. In between, the soft persistence of survival, the simple miracle of continuing, of being. These early humans lived without the noise of thought, without the illusion of control. They lived as part of everything around them, and in their quiet way, they belonged completely to the earth. Tomorrow will come the same as today. The same light, the same fire, the same search for food, for warmth, for each other. They do not need to know the meaning of their existence to live it. Their being itself is the meaning, steady, enduring, beautiful in its simplicity. Their world turns, and they turn with it. No boundaries, no hurry, no fear beyond the necessary. Only life, unfolding slowly beneath an ancient sun. They live not as individuals, but as circles, small bands bound by quiet understanding. A dozen, perhaps 20 souls joined by blood, by familiarity, by the simple fact that together they survive. There is no language for family, yet family is everything. Each life is a thread in a woven fabric of belonging. At the center of this web stands the group. No leader, no follower, just the rhythm of cooperation. One brings food, another finds water. The older guide the young, the strong protect the weak. Their rules are unspoken, shaped by need and instinct, carried through countless generations like wind through grass. They have no words for kindness, but they practice it daily. A child cries and a hand reaches to comfort. An injured hunter limps, and another offers food from their share. These acts, small and unrecorded, form the foundation of something immense, the birth of empathy. In a world of hunger and danger, compassion becomes the most powerful tool of survival. In their faces we see echoes of emotion we still know: joy in finding food, sorrow in loss, fear when the forest goes silent, relief when the fire catches again. Their emotions are raw, unguarded, direct. There are no walls of language to hide behind, only the truth of expression, the curve of a mouth, the tightening of eyes, the tilt of a head. When one dies, the group lingers nearby. They touch the body, smell it, hesitate before leaving. Perhaps they do not understand death in words, but they understand absence. Something gone, something that does not move anymore. Sometimes they cover the body with branches or stones. It may not be a ritual in our sense, but it is a gesture of care, an instinct to protect even what can no longer feel. From such instincts, all future ceremony would grow. Their relationships are woven from proximity. They spend their lives within arm's reach of each other. The children grow up watching every movement of their elders. Love for them is not an emotion to be spoken, but an experience of closeness, of shared breath and warmth. Every act of survival is shared. Every fear faced together, every triumph felt by all. Mothers carry their children close, wrapped against their bodies as they move through the land. Fathers hunt, but not alone. They return not just for themselves, but for everyone waiting by the fire. The act of sharing food, simple and wordless, becomes the first expression of generosity. Each piece passed from hand to hand reinforces a bond older than memory. In quiet moments, when the sun dips low and the air cools, they sit together watching the distance. Sometimes they touch each other's hair, remove burrs, pick insects from skin. These small acts of grooming, of physical closeness, bind them as deeply as any spoken promise. They are gestures of trust, reminders that they belong, that no one is truly alone. The young imitate the adults. They mimic the swing of the arm that throws, the cracking of nuts, the shaping of stone. They learn by watching, not by being told. Knowledge is passed through observation, repetition, patience. Each generation builds upon what the last discovered. It is the slow inheritance of survival. When disputes arise, over food, over space, over mating, they are brief, rarely violent. Anger flares, then fades. The group cannot afford division. Their lives depend on unity. The instinct to reconcile, to forgive, becomes stronger than the impulse to dominate. It is not peace in the moral sense, but peace as necessity, the understanding that togetherness is the only safety. The rhythms of affection are simple and profound. When danger approaches, the rustle of a predator in tall grass, they gather close. Fear moves through the group as a single current, and they respond as one. When a child laughs, that sound ripples outward, softening every face. Emotion, shared and reflected, becomes the glue that holds the fragile human circle together. Seasons come and go, and with them bonds deepen. Some groups meet others as they travel. Brief encounters beside rivers or hunting grounds. Sometimes they trade, sometimes they fight, but often they simply observe, cautious and curious. In those rare meetings, the spark of connection spreads wider, a recognition between beings who look and move alike. It is the first faint outline of community beyond the small circle of kin. There are moments of play, too. Children chase one another through the grass, mimicking the animals they see. Adults smile, a flicker of joy that brightens the stillness of their days. Laughter exists even here, soft and fleeting, a release from tension, a reminder of life's small delights. As they move through the world, they leave traces: campfires, bones, tools, marks of shared existence. Each site tells a story of cooperation: a broken spear repaired by another's hand, a meal prepared together, a shelter built where many slept. The Earth remembers these patterns long after they are gone. The connection between them and their surroundings is intimate. They read the land as they read each other, by signs and feeling. A bend in the river means water. A sudden silence means danger. The tilt of a companion's head means caution or calm. Life itself is a dialogue, not between minds, but between presence and response. At night, when stars emerge, the group huddles near the warmth of the fire. The children drift into sleep, their heads resting against their mother's arms. The older ones keep watch, staring into the flames, listening to the faint cries of night animals. They do not speak, but there is communication in silence. Each knows what the others think, what they feel. They are bound not by words, but by awareness. Time passes slowly in such a life. Bonds deepen with each season. The young grow strong, the old fade, and yet the circle endures. Their society is fragile but enduring in its simplicity. There is no ambition beyond survival, no desire for power or possession, only the instinct to remain together, to endure through change and loss. And within that endurance lies the quiet birth of something monumental: social memory. Each group carries not only its tools and fire, but its ways of being. How to share, how to grieve, how to trust. These patterns, carried across centuries, would become the blueprint of humanity's soul. The world around them may shift. Climates cool, herds migrate, rivers dry, but their relationships anchor them through it all. They learn that life is not about mastery, but about belonging. Belonging to each other, to the earth, to the fragile moment of existence that holds them. Their love is not romantic, not spoken, but lived. It is the quiet touch, the shared glance, the warmth of a body nearby in the cold night. It is the awareness that they are part of something larger, older, infinite. Through their connection, they endure the trials to come, the hunger, the storms, the great silence of near extinction that waits just beyond the horizon. It is this, more than tools or fire, that keeps them alive, the bond between one and another. The invisible thread that is never broken, that runs from their campfires through every family, every friendship, every act of kindness in the human story. The thread that still binds us, whispering across the ages. We belong, we survive, together. The rhythm of their world, though slow and steady, is not without tremors. Beneath the calm surface of life, danger stirs constantly, silent, patient, waiting. For early humans, every breath is a small victory. Every sunrise, another chance granted by a world that gives and takes in equal measure. The land begins to change. Seasons grow harsher, less predictable. Rains that once came regularly now fall in strange patterns. Rivers shrink. Forests that fed them retreat. The air grows colder in some places, drier in others. These shifts are slow, almost invisible in a single lifetime, yet relentless across generations. They press upon every living thing, beasts, trees, and humans alike, reshaping existence one season at a time. Food becomes uncertain. The herds that once thundered across the plains begin to vanish or move farther away, chasing the last patches of green. Fruits ripen later, roots grow scarce, and the old knowledge of where to find nourishment starts to fail. Hunger is not an event, but a constant shadow following them day after day. In this hunger, choices grow harder. Groups must travel farther to survive. Children tire easily. The elderly fall behind. The land that once felt generous now demands endurance. The soft bonds of family and cooperation are tested by the cold arithmetic of survival. Yet still, they move, one step after another, guided by instinct and the memory of abundance. Predators wait too. Great cats with eyes like molten gold stalk the herds, and sometimes the hunters themselves. Gigantic birds wheel above open plains, their cries echoing over the wind. There are no shelters strong enough, no walls to hide behind. The world belongs to strength, to stealth, to adaptation. And humans, fragile and slow, must learn to survive not by muscle, but by awareness. Night brings both refuge and fear. The fire glows softly, pushing back the darkness, but its light also reveals them to the wild. Sometimes they hear the distant roars of lions, the bone-deep growl of hyenas. Sometimes they see movement in the trees, something watching, calculating. They sit closer together then, feeling the heartbeat of the group steady their fear. Their silence becomes their defense. There are injuries, a slip on wet rock, a wound from a tusk or claw. Infection takes many before their time. There is no cure, only endurance. Those who heal become wiser, more careful. Those who don't become lessons remembered in silence. Over generations, the memory of loss shapes behavior, a living memory that teaches caution. And beyond all this danger, a greater force looms: climate. Around 900,000 years ago, Earth enters one of its long cold cycles. The warmth that once bathed the continents begins to fade. Ice creeps from the poles and seasons twist into extremes. Droughts and freezes alternate like the breathing of a restless planet. For many species, this is an ending. For humans, it becomes a crucible. Entire populations vanish. Some starve, others wander into lands too barren to sustain them. Great stretches of earth that once pulsed with life turn silent, empty. The number of humans dwindles, not in years but in ages. From thousands upon thousands, only a few hundred survive. The spark of humanity burns low, trembling against extinction. The struggle is not sudden. It is drawn out, subtle. The slow suffocation of possibility. A mother unable to feed her child. A hunter returning empty-handed for too many days. A band splitting apart, seeking better lands that do not exist. Each small failure, multiplied across generations, becomes a great collapse. Yet even here, in the shadow of disappearance, resilience flickers. Some groups learn to adapt, to eat what others cannot, to move when the seasons demand it. They learn the language of scarcity. They learn to endure hunger without despair, and in their endurance they preserve something more than survival. They preserve the potential for rebirth. The land itself becomes a teacher. It rewards the observant, the patient, the inventive. Those who can read the sky, the migration of animals, the hidden paths of rivers. They find the narrow thread that still leads to life. Intelligence becomes not a luxury, but a necessity. Memory too becomes sacred, remembering which valley held water, which cave faced away from the wind, which root was safe to eat. Knowledge becomes the truest weapon against extinction. When the coldest centuries come, some retreat into refuges. Deep valleys, river basins, coastal caves, where warmth lingers just enough. They huddle near firelight, telling the story of survival not in words, but through example. Each generation learns by watching how the last endured. Each act of care, of sharing food, of protecting the weak, becomes a resistance against the void. But even among survivors, the losses weigh heavily. Many species vanish. Familiar creatures gone from memory. Forests die and never return. The songs of birds fade into silence. The world contracts into small pockets of life, fragile and isolated. Humanity's entire existence becomes a whisper across the vastness of time. We cannot know their thoughts in those dark ages, but we can imagine the feeling, a deep uncertainty, an awareness of how thin life has become. The stars above them shine indifferent, ancient witnesses to their struggle. And still, somewhere in their small hearts, the will to continue beats quietly, not out of hope or vision, but from the oldest instinct of all, to keep living, even when nothing remains to promise survival. It is this instinct that defines them. Long before language or cities, before belief or art, there was endurance, the simple act of not giving up. The cold may bite, the hunger may gnaw, the darkness may surround, but they persist. And in that persistence lies the seed of everything to come. Thousands of years pass. Ice grows, retreats, grows again. Populations rise slightly, then fall once more. The balance of existence remains precarious, but never fully broken. Somewhere, in a sheltered valley or along a warmer coast, a small group survives long enough for the world to change again. And when it does, when warmth slowly returns, when rivers fill and grasslands spread, humanity stirs anew. From a near-vanished lineage, from perhaps fewer than 1,000 souls, the story of all who would come after begins again. We are the descendants of those few who refuse to disappear. Their struggles, though unremembered, live in us still. The fear of emptiness, the drive to seek, the instinct to gather and share, the quiet courage to endure loss. Every heartbeat we feel carries echoes of that ancient silence, of that long winter when humanity nearly vanished. The challenges that faced them were vast, almost insurmountable. Yet they survived, not through dominance or fortune, but through something simpler and far more profound: connection, adaptation, and the refusal to let the flame of life go out. In that fragile persistence, they unknowingly secured the future. Every civilization, every language, every song that would ever exist, all of it balanced on the endurance of those few hundred who weathered the storm of near extinction. They were not heroes. They were not chosen. They simply lived, and that was enough. When the winds of extinction began to settle, what remained was not only the fragile spark of survival, but something more enduring: the quiet birth of understanding. In those small, scattered groups who outlasted the great collapse, knowledge became the thread that held life together. Not knowledge as we think of it now, not words, not rules, not science, but something older, softer, and closer to instinct: the art of noticing. They had learned to read the world. A tilt of the sun, a new kind of cloud, a subtle shift in the taste of water. These were messages, signs of what was coming. They did not question how they knew, only that they did. Awareness itself became their greatest invention. They began to see patterns in chaos, to connect sound and movement, smell and season, light and life. Each small discovery became a story stored in memory, carried forward through generations without ever being spoken. Fire was their oldest ally. It had followed them for hundreds of thousands of years, but now it became essential, not just for warmth or protection, but for transformation. Fire softened stone, hardened wood, and made food safer to eat. It lengthened their nights, gave them time to sit in stillness, to think, to remember. Around the flickering glow, they began to understand rhythm, of day and night, of hunger and plenty, of life and death. In the reflections of the flames, their minds deepened. Their tools changed too. The old simple stones, sharp but crude, evolved into shapes more deliberate. Flakes were struck not at random, but with practiced precision. A single blow could now produce an edge fine enough to cut meat, scrape hides, carve wood. Skill became inheritance. A child watched a parent's hands and repeated each motion until it became part of the body's memory. In that repetition, innovation was born. They began to use their environment with intention. Bones became handles, fibers twisted into cords, branches shaped into digging sticks. What was once gathered became crafted. Slowly, imperceptibly, they began to shape the world around them rather than be shaped by it. It was the beginning of control, not dominance, but partnership with nature. Hunting changed as well. Where once they relied on chance or proximity, now they began to plan. They watched herds learn their paths, their habits. They understood that patience could achieve what speed could not. Ambush replaced chase. Traps replaced brute force. They began to cooperate with precision. One driving, one waiting, one striking. The hunt became a symphony of intent, guided by gestures, looks, and unspoken timing. Each success was a triumph of mind over muscle. The first true innovation, though, was not in tools or techniques. It was in memory. To remember, not merely through instinct, but through shared recollection, was the foundation of all progress. The group began to carry not only objects from one season to the next, but experiences. Here, the water stayed through the dry months. There, the trees bore fruit even when the rains failed. These memories formed the earliest maps, invisible, living within minds that walked the land. This kind of knowledge was fragile, but also beautiful. It lived entirely within people, carried through generations by the act of survival itself. When one died, their memory faded, but if even a fragment remained, a habit, a remembered path, a learned gesture, it could seed the next mind with wisdom. Slowly, the human mind became an archive of experience, reaching beyond a single lifetime. Curiosity, too, began to stir. In moments of calm, when danger receded and hunger was satisfied, they looked beyond the immediate. A child watching fire might poke it with a stick, just to see what happens. An adult might strike two stones together, fascinated by the spark. They did not know they were inventing. They were simply exploring. Curiosity was survival in disguise, the drive to understand before necessity demanded it. They began to travel farther, crossing rivers, exploring new lands. Migration, once a desperate act, became an opportunity. The search for food and water led to discovery of new plants, new animals, new landscapes. In every change of scenery, they learned something different about the world's design. They discovered that some stones cracked better than others, that some woods burned hotter, that certain roots could heal as well as feed. Each new piece of knowledge added a layer to their collective memory. Even their relationship with sound began to evolve. A warning call, a soothing murmur, a rhythmic beat. These were not yet words, but they carried meaning. Over time, these sounds grew more complex, more deliberate. Communication, once purely emotional, began to take on structure. They could share more than fear or joy. They could share intent. It was language in its earliest dawn, still wordless, yet already infinite. Around the fire, they practiced imitation, the foundation of teaching. A child learned to strike flint not because they were told, but because they saw and copied. This act of imitation, repeated endlessly, allowed knowledge to accumulate. It was not lost with each generation it grew. The first fragile chain of cultural continuity was forged, linking past to future. As the Earth's climate shifted again and life grew slightly easier, these innovations multiplied. Their tools became more specialized, some for scraping, others for cutting or piercing. They learned to store things, to hide food in cool places, to return for it later. Planning, foresight, and patience became new forms of intelligence. Humanity's mind was expanding beyond the moment. They learned to work with nature rather than against it. Fire was used to clear undergrowth, creating new pastures that drew animals. The first quiet manipulations of the environment had begun. They were not farmers yet, but they were already shaping the ecosystems that shaped them. Even their sense of self deepened. In water's reflection, they saw their own faces, perhaps for the first time not just as shapes but as beings. They began to recognize individuality. The realization that I exist is a small revolution in any mind, and within these ancient humans it stirred softly, like dawn after a long night. Through countless failures and quiet discoveries, the first seeds of human ingenuity were sown. Every chipped stone, every flame coaxed from friction, every gesture that carried meaning, all of it was progress, even if they never knew it. They were creating a language of survival that would one day become civilization. But what is most remarkable is that all of it was born not from ambition, but from necessity, from the will to endure. Innovation was the natural rhythm of life pushing against the boundaries of extinction. Out of hunger came tools. Out of cold came fire. Out of loneliness came communication. By adapting, they did not just survive, they transformed. The world that had nearly erased them became their teacher, and through that harsh education, humanity learned its most important lesson, that knowledge is not a possession, but a way of being. Long before they had words for it, they understood something we still chase today, that to live is to learn, and to learn is to live. Their quiet discoveries became our inheritance. Their curiosity, our foundation. Every idea humanity has ever had, every invention, every insight began there, in those dark valleys of struggle, when a small group of survivors stared into the flames and began, unknowingly, to think. As the earth continued its slow turning, the survivors of that near-forgotten age began to move beyond their hidden valleys and sheltered caves. The air grew milder. Ice loosened its grip upon the world. Rivers, once frozen and still, began to run again, carving paths through green and stone. The land awakened, and with it, humanity's small flame of life spread outward once more. For the first time in many tens of thousands of years, the world was vast again. Endless plains shimmered beneath the sun. Forests, reborn after the long cold, rustled with unseen creatures. Mountains, capped with the last remnants of ice, looked down upon valleys bursting with growth. The silence that once reigned during the age of near extinction was replaced by the gentle hum of rebounding life. Humans were not alone in this new world. Around them moved the titans of prehistory, great herds of elephants with curved tusks, saber-toothed cats slipping through tall grasses, and enormous flightless birds that still ruled some open plains. There were other humans too, though distant cousins rather than kin, creatures who shared the shape of our body, but not quite the spark behind our eyes. Some were robust and heavy, others slight and swift, each molded by their own lands and climates. The earth was, for a brief moment in its vast history, a living mosaic of intelligent beings. We were only one thread in that immense tapestry, and for a long while, not the strongest. In Asia and Europe, archaic humans thrived. In Africa, others like us adapted in their own ways. Across deserts and forests, across ice and fire, life was experimenting. The human form was still being written. The survivors who had emerged from the brink carried something subtle but powerful. A mind honed by crisis, a patience forged in scarcity. They walked differently now, not as wanderers lost, but as seekers aware. Their senses were tuned to every whisper of the environment, the flight of birds, the angle of wind, the rhythm of the seasons. Every step they took was a dialogue with the world. As they ventured farther, the planet itself seemed to call them onward. Following rivers and coasts, they traced paths that would, in time, circle the earth. They spread not by conquest, but by curiosity, by the simple instinct to keep going. They did not know where they were headed, only that there was always something beyond the horizon. With each new landscape, they changed. On high plains, they grew lean and strong. In deep forests, they became silent and watchful. Near oceans, they learned to read tides and gather shellfish from the shore. The environment sculpted their bodies and minds like clay in unseen hands. The wider world offered abundance, but also new trials. Diseases unknown to their ancestors lingered in stagnant water. Strange beasts defended their territories. Volcanic eruptions blotted out the sun for weeks at a time. Yet every obstacle taught them something. They learned to move with the rhythms of the earth, to understand that safety was never a place, but a pattern, a balance between change and adaptation. They began to notice the sky, the way the moon changed shape, the predictable rising and setting of the sun, the returning constellations marking the passage of seasons. Somewhere in that recognition, wonder was born. They may not have had words, but they had awareness, an awakening sense that they lived within a greater order, that the world around them was not chaos, but a living cycle of time. And beneath this awakening, an even deeper truth stirred. They began to realize that they were part of something vast and connected. The same fire that burned in their shelters burned also in volcanoes and lightning. The same rivers that nourished their bodies flowed into seas filled with life. The same wind that cooled their faces carried the cries of distant creatures they would never see. For the first time, they began to sense the unity of existence. Across the continents, life continued its slow dance of creation and destruction. Species appeared and vanished. Forests grew and fell. Mountains rose and eroded away. Yet through it all, these small bands of humans endured, like a steady rhythm beneath the changing song of the earth. They did not build monuments or carve symbols, but their existence was an act of quiet defiance against time itself. Every footprint pressed into the mud beside a river was a declaration. We are here. Each fire that flickered beneath the night sky was a tiny echo of the sun, a reminder that life still burned in the darkness. The wider world began to carry their mark. The animals they hunted grew wary of their scent. Paths formed where their feet passed again and again. Over centuries, their movements began to shape the landscape itself. Grasses thrived in cleared valleys. Seeds clung to their fur and skin, carried unknowingly to new soil. They became part of nature's endless web, not as conquerors, but as participants in the great experiment of life. Sometimes they encountered others, small groups, unfamiliar faces, creatures who looked like them but were not quite the same. Some meetings ended in violence, others in exchange. They might share a glance across a river, a cautious moment of recognition. Perhaps they traded sounds or gestures, perhaps even mated, their lineages merging briefly before parting again. These encounters would ripple through millennia, shaping the branches of humanity's evolutionary tree. The planet itself was restless. Continents drifted. The climate shifted once more. Warmth spread, then vanished. Every change tested them anew, and yet they adapted. They always adapted. Through every drought and flood, every storm and famine, they endured by remembering what their ancestors had learned, that life bends but does not easily break. By now, their minds carried centuries of inherited knowing. The patterns of animals, the signs of rain, the uses of plants, the patience of fire. Their knowledge was not written, yet it flowed through every gesture, every movement, every choice. It was memory made flesh. In this time, humanity became a mirror of the world itself, fragile, adaptable, and filled with hidden depth. They belonged not to one place, but to the entire living earth. And though they could not know it, every step they took, every adaptation they made, brought them closer to becoming us. The consciousness that would one day paint the stars, build cities, and name the ages was already there, faint but growing. They were no longer just surviving. They were beginning to understand. In the vast theater of life, they were a small presence, but an enduring one. The forests would shift, the glaciers would return, the great beasts would vanish, yet the human story would continue, quietly threading itself through every change. The wider world had tested them, shaped them, nearly erased them. But in doing so, it had also revealed what they truly were. Not the masters of the earth, but its students. Every breath, every fire, every shared gaze beneath the stars was a lesson. And through these lessons, humanity, fragile, wandering, eternal, learned how to belong to the world that had almost forgotten them. The world that once nearly erased humanity eventually became the cradle of its renewal. From the few hundred who had survived the long silence, the thread of life extended again, fragile, invisible, but unbroken. Time, vast and patient, began to weave their endurance into the deeper fabric of evolution. And from their survival, the story of all that followed was born. Theirs was not a legacy written in words or carved in stone, but one carried quietly in flesh and blood. Every heartbeat that came after, ours included, carries the rhythm of their struggle. The features of their faces softened through ages, but their instincts, their courage, their capacity for connection remained. The same hands that struck flint against stone would one day raise walls, write symbols, build telescopes to study the stars. Yet all of it traces back to that small spark that refused to die. When the earth warmed again, their descendants spread further, across valleys, rivers, and seas. They changed as the world changed, adapting to new climates, new challenges. The groups that once numbered in mere hundreds grew into thousands, then tens of thousands. Each generation added something new to the inheritance of survival. Sharper tools, deeper memory, richer cooperation. But it wasn't just the mind that evolved, it was the soul. The descendants of those ancient survivors began to feel something new, something their ancestors had only touched in moments of shared silence. Wonder. The awareness of beauty. They began to pause, to look not only at what sustained them, but at what surrounded them. The curve of a shell, the shape of a cloud, the gleam of light on water. In their wonder, the seeds of art were sown. A time would come, hundreds of thousands of years later, when their children would paint on cave walls. Great, sweeping images of the hunt, of animals, of human hands reaching outward. Those paintings, still found deep in the rock, are the whispers of that first awakening. They do not simply record life, they celebrate it. And that impulse, to create, to remember, to find meaning, was born in the darkness after near extinction. Their legacy is not measured in what they built, but in what they preserved. The possibility of us. Every story, every song, every act of kindness ever performed carries a trace of their endurance. When they held their children against the cold, when they shared the last embers of fire, when they chose togetherness over despair, they were shaping the moral foundation of our species. We carry their resilience in our bones. The instinct to protect one another, the quiet drive to explore, the need to ask why. These are not inventions of civilization. They are inheritances from the silence before civilization began. Our empathy, our creativity, our endurance, they are echoes of those few who lived through the impossible. In them, the human pattern was set, the balance of fear and courage, the pull between solitude and belonging, the fragile coexistence between violence and tenderness. Those opposites would define us forever, the constant dance between survival and meaning. Though their names are lost, their influence is not. The air we breathe is the same air they breathed. The stars that guided their wanderings still guide ours. The fire that once flickered in their caves still burns in the engines, cities, and hearts of their descendants. The connection between us and them is unbroken, like a single thread running through nearly 1 million years of time. For every innovation that humanity has achieved, from language to art, from agriculture to flight, there was once a moment when survival alone was the innovation. Their ability to keep living through unthinkable loss made all later achievements possible. Without them, there would be no history, no voice to tell it, no eyes to wonder at the stars. When modern scientists uncovered traces of that genetic bottleneck, when they realized that 99% of our ancestors had once vanished, they were not just reading data, they were uncovering a miracle. From perhaps fewer than 1,000 survivors, the entire human lineage was rebuilt. Every nation, every face, every culture, all of it descends from that handful of souls who endured when the world went silent. We often imagine our ancestors as distant, primitive, lesser. But if we could see them now, not their tools or their shelters, but their endurance, their quiet intelligence, their ability to care for one another against all odds, we would understand that they were the foundation of everything we are. They did not need language to express love, nor art to express meaning. Their existence was itself a masterpiece of persistence. Their legacy lies not in monuments, but in memory, the memory that endures within life itself, in every heartbeat that refuses to stop, in every hand that reaches for another in the dark, in every act of hope when reason falters. We are their continuation, their dream made real, their unfinished thought given voice. The great civilizations that would come later, Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, the empires that rose and fell, were only the flowering of a root planted by them. Without that root, nothing would have grown. And so, when we look back upon their world, we are not looking at strangers, but at the first reflections of ourselves. Their survival reshaped evolution. It was not the strongest who endured, nor the fiercest, but the ones who could adapt, cooperate, and care. That truth remains the essence of humanity. Every era, no matter how advanced, returns to it. That survival depends on connection, and in that connection lies our inheritance, the quiet understanding that no one endures alone. We survive as they did through one another, through shared warmth, shared knowledge, shared compassion. That is their greatest gift, passed down through countless generations. The knowledge that life, to continue, must always be shared. Their story does not end in extinction, but in transformation. From the narrowest thread of existence, humanity wove a vast and intricate world. The modern mind, the modern voice, the modern dream, all grew from that single moment of endurance nearly 1,000,000 years ago. When we stand under the stars tonight, we stand in the same light that shone upon them. The same wind moves across the grass, the same ocean breathes against the shore. And somewhere in that endless continuity, their presence lingers, not as ghosts, but as living memory, carried forward through the rhythm of our pulse and the pattern of our thoughts. Their legacy is us, and in every breath we take, their story continues. We stand now at the end of a story that began long before memory, a story that unfolded not in books or monuments, but in wind and dust, in heartbeat and flame. It is the story of our own beginning, of a time when humanity was nothing more than a fragile thread trembling in the vast silence of the world. 900,000 years ago, almost all of us vanished. The earth grew colder, harsher. The forests thinned, the rivers froze. Only a few hundred of our ancestors remained, scattered, hungry, and uncertain beneath the endless gray of an unforgiving sky. Yet somehow, they endured, and because of them, we are here. When we speak of evolution, of genetics, of population bottlenecks, it is easy to forget what those words mean in the human sense. They mean faces turned toward the fire for warmth. They mean hands clasped together in fear and hope. They mean the will to keep going, not because survival promised glory, but simply because life refused to surrender. That is the quiet miracle of our species. Not that we conquered the world, but that we refused to disappear from it. In the face of extinction, we persisted. In the shadow of loss, we remembered love. And from those faint embers, the light of humanity was rekindled. Every breath you take now is part of that ancient continuation. Every heartbeat echoes a rhythm that once beat inside a few hundred fragile bodies who faced the end and whispered, "Not yet." Their courage became our inheritance. Their endurance, our nature. When we imagine those early people, the survivors of the Great Silence, we might picture them as distant, primitive, almost other. But if we could sit beside their fires, feel the heat, watch the sparks drift upward into the night, we would know they were us. The same awe stirred in their chests when they looked up at the stars. The same tenderness filled them when they saw their children sleep. The same question haunted them: what lies beyond tomorrow? They were not the beginning of humanity's story. They were its salvation. And their voices, though lost to time, still whisper through the generations. When you hold someone close, when you feel wonder at a sunrise, when you dream of what could be, you are remembering them. The extinction that nearly ended us did something extraordinary. It reshaped who we would become. It taught our kind humility before nature's vastness. It carved resilience into our bones. It planted in us a quiet understanding that existence itself is fragile, precious, and shared. We are not here because the world was kind. We are here because, against all odds, we learned to adapt, to cooperate, to care. Our ancestors were sculpted by scarcity, but defined by compassion. They learned that survival was not just about strength, but about connection. The willingness to protect, to nurture, to believe in something beyond the self. And from that belief, civilization was born. Language, art, science, all of it grew from a single seed of persistence buried deep in prehistory. We have built cities that glitter brighter than the stars, and machines that whisper across the sky. Yet all our triumphs are rooted in that same instinct that once kept a handful of humans alive in the cold. The desire to continue. When you trace the thread of humanity backward through time, past the pyramids, past the stone circles, past even the first sparks of fire, you arrive at that small, nearly invisible point, a few hundred people standing on the edge of extinction. And in that moment, all that we are, every poem, every discovery, every act of love, was contained in their choice to endure. The earth remembers them, in the wind that shapes the mountains, in the rivers that still carve the valleys they once walked, in the firelight that still flickers in our homes and our hearts. They are not gone. They have simply become everything. And so, as this story comes to a close, we are left with a quiet realization that survival is not the opposite of peace. That history is not just the record of progress, but the memory of persistence. And that the deepest truth of being human is not power nor conquest, but endurance through connection. Perhaps that is the lesson the past still offers. That when the world grows dark, when the cold creeps in, when the future feels uncertain, the same strength that once carried our ancestors through near extinction still lives within us. We are, each of us, the continuation of a miracle, not of dominance, but of endurance, not of glory, but of quiet defiance against the silence. And when we look up at the night sky, at the stars that watched over them long ago, we can almost feel the same stillness they felt. A reminder that we are temporary, yet eternal, fleeting, yet unbroken, a single moment in time that refuses to end. Humanity was nearly erased, but it endured. And in that endurance lies the greatest story ever told, our own.